You're watching PM Agenda. Let's bring in our panel of political strategists this Monday afternoon. Bruce Hawker and Grahame Morris. Very good afternoon to both of you. I want to start on the Bali Nine. We've discussed this before, but now it's imminent, apparently, the executions. And Grahame, you've long taken a bit of a contrary view to that of both major parties and many others expressing their dismay that Indonesia is going ahead with this. How do you see it this week? If the executions do happen in the next couple of days, what will it mean for the relationship, do you think?
Well, David, look, I admire people like Foreign Minister and those who have been out there passionately trying to assist these two Australians. But it still seems to me we ought to share a thought for those Australian families who have drug addict children who may be saved from an horrendous death because these drugs didn't get into our circulation. So, you know, it's two-edged here. And yes, look, it's dreadful what's going to happen, but, you know, these people are not Mother Teresa and they've broken a law in another country. As to what it means for our relationships, I find it very difficult to believe that our wheat farmers, our sugar farmers and our other people on the land should suffer because of a couple of drug dealers.
And you reckon that could be the outcome?
You know, that is the main relationship, plus the people smuggler stuff. But, you know, for primary producers on the land to suffer because of a couple of drug dealers just seems bizarre to me.
Yeah, Bruce, we do have a very important relationship on the trade level, the security level, dealing with those border protection issues as well. What do you think these executions, if they go ahead, will do to that relationship?
Look, I don't think they will affect them. There's some sadness in me saying that, because I think at one level we should actually be taking a harder line in order to try to dissuade them from executing more people. But I think that life will go on for the exporters and importers, and that's the reality that we deal with. It was like that when people were Australian citizens were executed in Singapore, and I think there were Australian citizens executed in Malaysia in the last 20 years. You know, the relationships continue. But that doesn't mean that what's going to happen in the next few days is in any way justifiable. I mean, to take Grahame's point, of course we don't want drugs coming to this country, but they were going to spend the rest of their lives in jail anyway. So the prospect of these characters ever smuggling drugs again was absolutely zero, whether they were executed or not. You know, I think we just need to really keep telling the Indonesians and other countries that that have the death penalty that, you know, we consider this to be state-sanctioned murder, as the Jakarta Post said.
What you said at the outset there, Bruce, about you wish a harder line was being taken. Are you suggesting things like threatening to withdraw our ambassador? And even what Don Rothwell was telling us a little earlier this hour about threatening international legal action against Indonesia?
Well, I do think there should be some response after the event. I mean, I'm not saying that this should be a sort of thing that stays on for another 30 years or anything ridiculous like, you know, the American sanctions against Cuba, but it should be a strong response that demonstrates the Indonesians that, you know, that we aren't just full of hot air when it comes to this issue, that we are actually prepared to do some things which will, you know, cause them some discomfort. Now, I don't think that should be happening forever, but I think it should happen for a little while. What they decide to do, if they were to do anything, would obviously be up to them. But I do think that there's a case to be made for saying that, you know, we're not just going to shut up once these executions take place.
Yeah, Grahame, I'm sure you disagree with Australia taking any such action, but...
No, look, I don't mind our ambassador or High Commissioner being withdrawn, but you know, then you get into the retaliation thing, and then they say, oh, well, we'll go and get our wheat from somewhere else, and we'll go and get our sugar from somewhere else, and all of a sudden, you know, you've got ramifications there that were unintended, and our poor old farmers get a smack on the head again. No, look, once it's over, we've finished growling at each other. We all shake our heads and wished it hadn't happened, but it did, and we get on with life.
Let's talk about a few other things in the time we've got. We were just talking to the Health Minister, Grahame, about taking some over-the-counter medicines off the PBS. Paracetamol, aspirin, anti-dandruff shampoo. Sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it?
Well, it did to me. I sort of didn't know they were on the PBS. And then I thought the other day, I went to a doctor and I got a script for iron tablets. And I went and I had the script filled, and then I discovered I could have just got them off the shelf. You know, I don't know how many are there.
And it's often cheaper off the shelf. Well,
yeah. And you wouldn't have had to pay the sort of chemist markup.
And is that what's going on here? That it's a market for the chemist?
I think the health minister is onto something here, and you could go further. You know, this is just you know, pharmaceutical stuff, but. You know, I got a funny feeling a lot of doctors are over-servicing, particularly, you know, dare one say it, a lot of the newer Australian doctors are sort of over-servicing.
What do you mean by that? What are they doing?
Well, you know, you go in for one thing and you find that a few extra things that you're asked, you know, what about this and are you okay there? Oh, $6, $6, $6, and all of a sudden, you know, that doctor is billing Medicare for a whole bunch of things that were unnecessary. Oh. You know, why?
Right.
That sort of stuff ought to be checked.
Okay, and you found it a particular problem with newer Australian doctors?
Well, yeah, one shouldn't say that, but yeah.
Okay, Bruce?
Well, he must be talking about New Zealand doctors over here doing those sorts of things. I can't imagine what else Grahame would be thinking about. Look, I do think, though, that there's a case to be made for taking off Panadol and these other over-the-counter medications. But I think Kathy King's point is very appropriate here. It has to be then rolled back into services and into funding for other health services, because this is the government, let's not forget, that actually was planned to cut in the last budget $80 billion out of health and education over 10 years. So they've got a lot of catching up to do when it comes to restoring some credibility on this issue. But on these over-the-counter paracetamol and other forms of medication, sure, let's have a good hard look at it.
All right, well, at least there's agreement on that aspect. Let me ask you finally, Bruce, gay marriage. Tanya Plibersek, who's acting Labor leader at the moment while Bill Shorten's out of the country, is flagging that at the conference coming up in July, Labor Party National Conference, she will be pushing to make it a binding vote rather than a conscience vote for Labor MPs. Do you think that'll get up at the conference, and will it make much of a difference in Parliament if all Labor MPs were bound to vote in favour of gay marriage?
I think it'd make a difference in the Senate. I'm not sure about the lower house. To answer the second question first, as to whether it will happen or not, I suspect it won't. Labor is a very broad church, and the word church is sort of relevant here because at one end of the spectrum you have the Joe de Bruins and others who are very deeply conservative, and there's still very, very powerful people in the Labor Party, and I don't think that they're going to allow it to happen. And frankly, I'm not sure that it's a stoush worth happening, but let's face it, you know, the Labor Party conference is an opportunity to have a good old-fashioned Barney, and it looks like one's going to happen. I also think that in 10 years' time, people will be looking back at this when gay marriage is part and parcel of our legal institutions, saying, what the hell was all this about? But frankly, I don't think it's going to happen because it's too divisive still inside the Labor Party. But in 10 years' time, I don't think it'll be the case. And what a shame, by the way. Let
me ask Grahame, just we're nearly out of time.
What a great way to split the Labor Party. And you think, why would Tanya Plibersek be doing this? She's being threatened by the Greens in her own seat. That's why. Otherwise, it makes sense, particularly for a lawmaker. And she's saying, hey, there shouldn't be legal discrimination, which is an odd sort of thing for a lawmaker to do, because everything, tax law, our favourable discrimination in favour of Indigenous people, our laws in favour of migrants who come through the front door and whatnot, that's all illegal discrimination.
Should be conscience votes on gay marriage. There should be conscience votes on gay marriage.
Careful, Grahame.
Look,
careful.
It'll split the Labor Party. It'll split the Labor Party. The shoppies, the right wingers, they won't wear it.
It will. All right, we'll come back to the other side of the debate on that later on. We're out of time. Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker. We'll catch up next week. Thank you.